The Second Sex, by Simone de Beauvoir. About the author. Simone de Beauvoir was a prominent French writer, intellectual, existentialist philosopher, political activist, feminist, and social theorist. Beauvoir's existentialist philosophy is integral to her feminist ideas. She argued that women are oppressed by being consistently defined in relation to men and advocated for women's economic independence and liberation from societal constraints. Her works emphasize the importance of personal freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. She believed that individuals must create their own essence through actions. Beauvoir was an active participant in political causes, particularly those related to women's rights, anti-colonialism, and social justice. She continued to write prolifically, producing essays, novels, and articles on a wide range of topics. Beauvoir's work laid the groundwork for second-wave feminism. Her insights into the ways women are socially constructed and oppressed continue to influence feminist theory and activism. Beauvoir's novels and memoirs are celebrated for their depth, clarity, and engagement with profound philosophical and social issues. Her contributions to existentialist thought and her critiques of traditional philosophy have left a lasting impact on intellectual history. Simone de Beauvoir was a groundbreaking thinker whose work has had a profound and lasting impact on philosophy, literature, and feminist theory. Her commitment to exploring and challenging the social structures that limit human freedom continues to inspire and resonate with readers and activists around the world. Significance of the title. The title, The Second Sex, holds deep significance and captures the central theme of Simone de Beauvoir's book. The title reflects Beauvoir's argument that women have been historically viewed as the other, in relation to men. Men are seen as the default or primary sex, while women are considered secondary or subordinate. The Second Sex highlights how women are often treated as less important or inferior to men in various aspects of life, including social, political, and economic spheres. The title points to the widespread societal belief that women are second-class citizens. By naming her book, The Second Sex, Beauvoir challenges readers to think about these ingrained perceptions and the unjust treatment of women. The title provokes thought about why women are placed in this secondary position and what can be done to change it. The title also serves as a call to action. It underscores the need for recognizing women as equals to men, not as secondary or lesser beings. It suggests the necessity of re-evaluating and transforming the societal structures that perpetuate this inequality. In summary, the title, The Second Sex, effectively encapsulates the book's exploration of women's subordinate status in society. It emphasizes the need to question and change the perception of women as secondary to men, aiming for a more equal and just society. Summary of the book. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir is a comprehensive exploration of women's lives, their roles in society, and the ways in which they have been historically oppressed. Simone de Beauvoir begins by questioning what it means to be a woman. She argues that women have been defined not as individuals but in relation to men, as the other. This concept forms the foundation of her analysis. Part 1. Facts and Myths. Beauvoir examines biological, psychoanalytic, and historical perspectives on women. She acknowledges biological differences but argues that these do not justify social inequalities. She critiques Freud's theories for reinforcing gender stereotypes and discusses how historical events have shaped women's roles. Beauvoir explores the roles women have played throughout history, from prehistoric times to the mid-20th century. She highlights how women have been excluded from many areas of life and how their contributions have often been overlooked or undervalued. She analyzes myths and stereotypes about women that appear in literature, religion, and philosophy. These myths present women as mysterious, passive, and dependent on men, reinforcing their subordinate status. Part 2. Lived experience. Beauvoir discusses how girls are raised differently from boys, conditioned to conform to societal expectations. Girls are taught to aspire to marriage and motherhood, limiting their potential and instilling a sense of inferiority. She examines how women experience their sexuality. Unlike men, women often face repression and control of their sexual desires. Society imposes a double standard, judging women more harshly for sexual behavior. Beauvoir explores lesbianism, challenging the view that it is abnormal. She argues that it is one of many valid expressions of sexuality. Marriage is scrutinized as an institution that often confines women to domestic roles. Beauvoir argues that marriage can be limiting and oppressive, restricting women's independence and personal growth. Motherhood is portrayed as a complex role that can be both fulfilling and confining. While some women find purpose in motherhood, others feel trapped by societal expectations and the loss of their own identity. Beauvoir discusses women's roles in society, including their friendships, work, and involvement in the arts and politics. She emphasizes the importance of economic independence and the challenges women face in achieving it. She explores how societal expectations shape women's character. Women are often seen as nurturing and passive because they are socialized to be this way, not because these traits are innate. Beauvoir examines how women justify their own oppression. Some women accept their roles, finding comfort in them, while others resist and seek change. Beauvoir concludes by arguing that women must achieve economic independence and freedom from societal expectations to be truly equal to men. She calls for a radical transformation of society, where both men and women can be free to pursue their own paths without the constraints of traditional gender roles. The Second Sex is a powerful and insightful analysis of women's oppression. Beauvoir's work challenges readers to rethink gender roles and strive for a society where women and men are truly equal. Critical analysis of the book. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir is a seminal work in feminist philosophy and gender studies. Published in 1949, the book is a comprehensive examination of women's oppression and a foundational text for the feminist movement. Beauvoir's central argument is that women have been historically considered the other, in relation to men. She explores how this concept has shaped women's lives and their roles in society. The book is divided into two main parts: Facts and Myths, and Lived Experience. Facts and Myths. In this section, Beauvoir examines historical, biological, and cultural myths about women. She argues that many of these myths are used to justify women's subordinate status. Beauvoir acknowledges biological differences between men and women but argues that these differences do not justify social inequalities. She criticizes the way society uses biology to pigeonhole women into certain roles, particularly those related to reproduction and caregiving. She delves into how different societies have viewed women through history, pointing out that the subjugation of women is not natural but constructed. She discusses how patriarchy emerged and became entrenched in various cultures. Beauvoir examines myths and stereotypes about women that permeate literature, religion, and philosophy. She highlights how these myths create a distorted image of women as passive, nurturing, and dependent on men. Lived experience. In the second part, Beauvoir focuses on women's everyday experiences and how they navigate their identities within a patriarchal society. She describes how girls are conditioned from a young age to conform to societal expectations. This conditioning limits their opportunities and instills a sense of inferiority. Beauvoir discusses how women's sexuality is often repressed or controlled. She critiques the double standards that exist in society regarding male and female sexuality. She explores the institution of marriage and the role of motherhood, arguing that these institutions often restrict women's freedom and personal growth. She points out that while some women find fulfillment in these roles, many others feel trapped and unfulfilled. Beauvoir argues for the importance of economic independence for women. She believes that without the ability to support themselves financially, women will always be dependent on men and subject to their control. Some critics argue that Beauvoir underestimates the impact of biological differences. They believe she downplays the role of biology in shaping gender differences. Beauvoir's existentialist philosophy, which emphasizes individual freedom and responsibility, is seen by some as overly individualistic. Critics argue that it doesn't fully address the structural and systemic nature of women's oppression. Critics point out that Beauvoir's analysis is heavily focused on Western societies. They argue that her conclusions may not be applicable to women in non-Western cultures, where different social and economic factors come into play. The concept of intersectionality, which considers how various social identities, like race, class, and sexuality intersect and contribute to unique experiences of oppression, was not addressed in Beauvoir's work. Later feminists have criticized this omission. Despite these criticisms, The Second Sex remains a foundational text in feminist thought. It paved the way for future feminist theorists and activists. Beauvoir's analysis of women's oppression has influenced various fields, including sociology, psychology, and literature. Her call for women's economic independence and the dismantling of patriarchal structures continues to resonate. The Second Sex challenges readers to rethink gender roles and strive for a more equal and just society. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir was published in 1949, a time of significant social and political change, especially in post-World War II Europe. Understanding this context helps to grasp the impact and importance of Beauvoir's work. The war had just ended, and Europe was rebuilding. The war effort had seen women taking on roles traditionally held by men, which led to questioning traditional gender roles when men returned and women were expected to go back to their previous domestic roles. Early feminist movements had already started in the 19th and early 20th centuries, focusing on women's suffrage and basic legal rights. By the late 1940s, there was a growing awareness and push for broader gender equality. Society largely viewed women as wives and mothers. Their primary responsibilities were seen as homemaking and child-rearing, with limited access to education and professional careers. Male dominance in social, political, and economic spheres was widespread. Men held most positions of power and influence, while women were expected to be subordinate. This was a popular philosophical movement at the time, emphasizing individual freedom and responsibility. Beauvoir, being an existentialist, used this framework to explore women's oppression. The political landscape was marked by rebuilding nations and re-establishing political structures. There was a focus on human rights and democracy, creating a fertile ground for discussions on equality. Although the major waves of feminism, especially the second wave in the 1960s and 70s, were yet to come, the seeds were already sown. Women were increasingly voicing their dissatisfaction with societal constraints and seeking greater autonomy and rights. Women faced numerous legal inequalities. In many countries, they had limited property rights, lacked legal personhood in certain contexts, and were often not allowed to make decisions about their own lives without male approval. Beauvoir's book was groundbreaking in this context. It provided a comprehensive analysis of women's lives and the structures that oppressed them, resonating with the experiences of many women. It encouraged women to question their roles and seek greater equality and independence. The Second Sex is a powerful and thought-provoking book that challenges long-held assumptions about gender and society. Beauvoir's exploration of women's oppression is thorough and insightful, making it a crucial read for anyone interested in feminist theory and gender studies. The social and political context of the late 1940s was marked by traditional gender roles, male dominance, and the beginning of more vocal women's rights movements. The Second Sex emerged as a critical text that challenged the status quo and laid the intellectual foundation for future feminist movements, making it a pivotal work in the history of feminism. Themes. The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir explores several important themes that critically examine the condition of women in society. Here is a detailed analysis of the main themes. The concept of the other. Beauvoir argues that women have been historically defined as the other, in relation to men, who are seen as the default or the norm. This othering leads to women being treated as secondary, inferior, and dependent on men. It shapes their identity and limits their opportunities. Myths and stereotypes. Society creates and perpetuates myths and stereotypes about women, portraying them as passive, nurturing, and dependent. These myths reinforce gender roles and justify the unequal treatment of women. They influence how women see themselves and how they are perceived by others. Biological determinism. While acknowledging biological differences, Beauvoir argues that these differences do not determine women's roles in society. Society uses biology to justify the subjugation of women, restricting them to roles related to reproduction and caregiving. Social conditioning. From a young age, girls are socialized to conform to societal expectations that limit their potential and instill a sense of inferiority. This conditioning affects their ambitions, behavior, and self-perception, leading to internalized oppression. Marriage and motherhood. Marriage and motherhood are traditionally seen as the primary roles for women. These roles often confine women, limiting their independence and personal growth. While they can be fulfilling, they are also sources of oppression for many women. Sexuality. Women's sexuality is often repressed or controlled, with society imposing a double standard. This control restricts women's freedom and reinforces their subordinate status, creating guilt and shame around their natural desires. Economic independence. Beauvoir argues that economic independence is crucial for women's liberation. Without financial independence, women remain dependent on men and are unable to achieve true equality. Existential freedom. Drawing from existentialist philosophy, Beauvoir emphasizes the importance of individual freedom and self-determination. She argues that women must transcend societal constraints and define their own lives, rejecting roles imposed by patriarchal structures. Critique of traditional philosophy. Beauvoir critiques how traditional philosophy and literature have portrayed women, often reinforcing stereotypes. These portrayals contribute to the othering of women and justify their subordinate position in society. Call for social change. Beauvoir calls for a radical transformation of society to achieve gender equality. She advocates for changes in education, work, and legal systems to ensure that women have the same opportunities as men. The second sex delves deeply into the themes of women's oppression, societal conditioning, and the quest for freedom and equality. Beauvoir's analysis highlights the importance of challenging and changing the societal structures that limit women's potential. Her work remains a cornerstone in feminist thought, encouraging ongoing reflection and action toward gender equality.